Hey, it's Jasper, and today we're talking about the best premium active noise canceling headphones. And as you can see, I have basically all the latest greatest options from Bose, Apple, Sony, Sennheiser, Bowers & Wilkins, and more. And I've been doing some testing. So of course, I've been using them outside to get a sense for how they all perform under real world conditions, but then I've also been doing some testing inside. So for example, this is my good pal Mikey. He's a headphone testing microphone, and I've been using him to measure the active noise canceling performance in all these, and I have some pretty interesting results there. Then I also have Clampy. He's a little sketchy. I may have built him myself, but he allows me to measure the clamping force in all these headphones. So I'll talk about that as well as my overall impressions on comfort. And then I've also done some pretty extensive testing on their microphones. So you'll hear how they all perform under both quiet and noisy call conditions. And of course, we'll talk about sound quality, build quality, features, connectivity, basically everything you'll need in order to make an informed buying decision. Before we dive in, one quick note, I'm also working on a mega review where I'll be comparing the premium options against some of these budget and mid-price ones. And yes, there are actually a few that I really like, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. All my videos have no sponsors. It's just my own testing, own research, own opinion, and your support really does go a long way. But enough of this groveling, let's now get into the video. To kick things off, let's first level set on the prices. And remember, this is as of recording in US dollars in the United States, but also remember that these prices do tend to change pretty frequently, so be sure to check the latest. And I have included links to all of these in the description. Also, if you want to sign up for deal alerts in any of these, be sure to check out Dip. It's actually the service that I built myself, and it just allows me to send you an email if I ever spot a good deal on the headphones that you're interested in, so then you can buy them when their price dips. But now let's talk about active noise canceling performance. To test this, I use Mikey first to get a baseline measurement where I have no headphones on, and then I'd play a sound. And here's an example measurement that I got with pink noise. The y-axis shows how loud, the x-axis is the sound frequency. And then I'd repeat this process, but with different sets of headphones on his ears and ANC on. And the difference between the lines would be how much sound is blocked by both passive and active noise cancellation. And to try to avoid any anomalies, I did it with jet engine noise as well as pink noise, and I took multiple measurements over multiple days. So I'm pretty happy with where I got, but do keep in mind, I am just a dude in a room and I'm not some million-dollar lab. But now let's look at my preliminary results. This table shows the average decibel reduction for each headphone with ANC on. And as a reminder, the more decibels reduced, the better. I do say these are preliminary results because after comparing them with my own anecdotal testing, I realized that it's only telling a partial story. So the good news is I figured out why, and I have some better results that paint a more accurate picture. The bad news is we're gonna have to align on the fundamentals of ANC tech and some quirks of human hearing in order to get to that. So I'm gonna try to do double duty where I'm gonna explain all of this while testing the microphones on all these so you can hear how they perform. So first, you'll hear me using them in a quiet room, and then about 10 seconds into each segment, I'll play some background noise, and you'll be able to get a sense for how the microphone handles noisy conditions. And for reference, this is what that background noise will sound like. A lot of people say active noise canceling works by playing an opposite sound, but what does that actually mean? Let's say we want to block an external sound that's around 500 hertz. What's the opposite of a 500 hertz sound? Well, that doesn't exactly exist. But what does exist is a 500 hertz sound that is phase shifted. So it's actually just another 500 hertz sound, but it's timed perfectly so that the peaks of the sound waves you want to neutralize are perfectly out of sync with the peaks of the waves you're creating to cancel it out. When these two waves interact, they end up netting out to silence. And this is a process called destructive interference. But crucially, this phase shift mechanism gets a lot harder to pull off above around 1,000 hertz or so. And just for reference, this is what 1,000 hertz sounds like. It's harder to cancel at higher frequencies because they physically have much shorter wavelengths. So for example, a 1,000 hertz sound wave is around 1.1 feet long, and a 100 hertz sound wave is 11 feet long. So this means that your margin for error when producing that phase shifted sound is much smaller for higher frequencies. If you have an 11-foot long sound wave and your phase shifted sound is off by, let's say, 6 inches or so, you're still going to cancel out most of that sound. But if you're off by 6 inches on, let's say, a 12-inch long sound wave, you're not going to be canceling out much. And it's really unfortunate that phase shift ANC gets less effective above around 1,000 hertz or so, because it turns out that human ears are actually most sensitive to sounds that are between 2,000 and 5,000 hertz. And to illustrate this, I'm going to play two tones that are actually being played at the same level of loudness. See how you can hear the 2,000 hertz tone much more clearly? Bringing this back to ANC, since not all sounds are created equal to human ears, this also means that not all sound reductions are created equal. And that means that you're more likely to notice a sound reduction that's around 1,500 hertz than 150 hertz. When we look at my revised ANC results next, you'll see I applied a weighting system that's actually called A weighting, and it more heavily values reductions in sounds that humans are more sensitive to, and values reductions in sounds that humans are less sensitive to a little bit less. And I'm sure some of you are probably screaming at the monitor saying, hey, Jasper, if phase shift ANC basically stopped working above 1,000 hertz, wouldn't that mean that all ANC headphones would basically perform the same above 1,000 hertz too? And that's actually the really interesting thing. It turns out, no, in these higher frequencies is actually kind of where the real ANC battle seems to be being fought. I can see in my test measurements that some headphones are more effective at canceling out these mid-range sounds than others, and I can prove that it's not just from better passive isolation. And while this mid-range ANC is not as powerful as it is with those lower frequencies, since humans are more sensitive to that mid-range, even small reductions here can make a meaningful impact. There's not much public information about this, but I've been told by an expert that in addition to phase shift ANC, there's actually another mechanism at play. It's called active damping, and it works by using the diaphragm of the speaker in the headphone to absorb some of the sound energy, where it's used to soak up those unwanted sounds and then dissipate that energy in the form of tiny, tiny amounts of electricity. And Bose actually introduced a very similar concept as a car suspension system about 20 years ago. Didn't go anywhere, but figured I'd still mention it. I still have lots of questions about the active damping side of things, so if you happen to be an acoustic engineer, definitely leave a comment, but also let me know which of these microphones you thought sounded the best. Overall, I think I was most impressed with the Bowers and Wilkins and Sony options, especially the Px7 S3 and the Px8 S2. The ones I'll say were just kind of middle of the pack were the rest of them, with the one exception being the Bathys. Those just sounded so bad with background noise. The other one that sounds really bad with background noise is these. I just don't sound particularly good. And honestly, I kind of think I look like a massive fool in them, but maybe I just always look like a massive fool. I don't know. But anyway, now let's go look at our revised ANC results. Just as a reminder, here are the original results. We have them sorted by most sound cancel at the top, with the XM6 leading the charge, the AirPod Max in second, and the Sonos Ace in third. But now if I apply that A weighting, which I talked about earlier, you can see the picture starts to change a little bit. And my overall takeaway is there are really four groups here. The XM6 are just the clear ANC winner, and they're almost in a class of their own. And I attribute this to just because they're really good not only at canceling out low notes, but they can also cut into some of those mid notes as well. Then we have the XM5 all the way to the Sonos Ace with really close results. And this is what I see as like the second group. They're all really excellent, but just not quite at the same level as the XM6. Then we have the Dyson all the way to the nothing, and they all also have really similar values. And I'd honestly say I think this is basically where like that good enough threshold sits for most people. It's still really impressive ANC and cut out a significant amount of background noise. And once you have some audio playing, it will probably be perfectly adequate for most people, but it's just not quite as good as the class leaders. And then finally, we have the Bathys, and these honestly just have pretty bad ANC, which totally matches my real world testing. This just isn't what they're made to excel at. Okay, I think we covered ANC pretty darn thoroughly now, so let's move on and talk about sound quality. I'm probably going to catch some heat for saying this, but I think for most people, basically any of these headphones would be a perfectly fine choice from a sound quality perspective. And before you leave me mean comments, hear me out. I think I've got two pretty good reasons. First is just in the overall consumer ANC space, these are all some of the best and most premium options, and all of the really terrible sounding cheap stuff has already been filtered out. Second, by far the most common issue that people have with headphones is how their frequency response is tuned. Like, is there too much bass, too much treble, not enough bass? You get it. And nowadays, if you don't like the out-of-the-box sound, you can usually dial in your preference using the equalizer in their companion app. Now, not all of these support that, and I'll definitely talk about those, but by and large, the default tuning doesn't really matter because in like 20 seconds, you can dramatically change the way the headphones sound. And I acknowledge you can't fix all issues with digital tuning. Like you can't fix the soundstage and imaging and clarity with just tweaking a setting, but I feel like for most people, that's not gonna be the biggest concern. Those are kind of hard to hear and really more audiophile concerns. So I'm not gonna spend 15 minutes waxing poetic about the default out-of-the-box sound characteristics in great detail because honestly, it's just not a good use of your time if you could just blow up whatever I say by tweaking the EQ. Instead, I'm going to talk about how customizable their sound is with their respective equalizers, if they have them. And then for you fancy pants out there, I will touch on my favorites from a soundstage and sound clarity perspective. I'm going to go a bit more in depth on these first two because these are the only two that don't have any sort of native equalizer. So what you hear is basically what you're stuck with, and surprise, surprise, they are both Apple products. In typical Apple fashion, I guess they think they know best. But I have to say, maybe they do, at least for the AirPod Max, because I really do like the stock tune. It's pretty neutral with just a little bit of warmth, meaning the bass is a little bit more emphasized, but it's definitely not overwhelming. They've also slightly rolled off the treble on the high end to prevent any sort of listening fatigue. And in general, I think the tuning and the overall sound quality is actually excellent here. The Beats Studio Pro is an interesting one because honestly, I was terrified when I realized they didn't have an EQ because Beats is famous for having super emphasized bass, but surprisingly out of the box, they actually had a pretty neutral sound. That being said, I have to wonder who these are for because I think a lot of people are going to buy them expecting that Beats signature sound and then not going to be able to make any adjustments, and there's just going to be a lot of disappointment there. So overall, while I actually think both of these headphones are tuned pretty well, I am disappointed by Apple because these are both premium products and there's no doubt that many people would enjoy being able to make some adjustments. Maybe someone from Apple will listen to this amazing video and be swayed by my plea, so fingers crossed and we can hope for the best. The rest of these should go pretty quickly because now we're going to look at how their EQs stack up, but I will say just because some of these have more customizability than others, that doesn't necessarily mean they're better. In fact, the more options you have, it also means the easier it is to really mess up your sound. So keep that in mind if you are the type of person that likes to tinker, or maybe you just want something pretty simple. So on the more simple side of things, you have the Bose QuietComfort Ultra, the Bowers & Wilkins Px8, and the Sonos Ace. These all have a 2 or 3 band EQ. And then under what I call like the standard customizability with a 5 or 6 band EQ, you have the Bowers & Wilkins Px7 S3 and the Px8 S2, the Sony XM5, the Focal Bathys, and the Dyson OnTrac. And then under the high customizability side of things, you have the Sony XM6 with a whopping 10 band EQ, and then you have the Nothing Headphone 1, which has what's called a parametric EQ. So of course it lets you adjust the gain, but it also allows you to specify the exact center frequencies and the bandwidth or Q, so you can adjust how wide or narrow the affected frequency range will be. They also have a really fun EQ sharing feature that allows you to share them via QR codes. So here are a few popular ones, just in case any of you end up getting a pair. And I'll indulge you audiophiles for a second. So if you care about soundstage and clarity, the three that you should probably consider are the HDB 630, the Focal Bathys, and the Px8 S2. I think they all have a really impressive soundstage where I can physically place the different instruments in 3 dimensions with great clarity and separation. Out of those three, I'll say the best is probably the HDB 630. It just sounds really impressive, and it has that really tunable parametric EQ, which the others don't have. So that probably ekes out the win, but the other two aren't bad either. So it's kind of hard to choose. If it were me, I would probably still choose the Px8 S2 just because I think it's a nicer all-around package. But also for you fringe audiophiles out there, don't just skip out on the kind of second tier, which I'd say are the QuietComfort Ultra, the AirPod Max, and the XM6, and maybe the Px7 S3 as well. These are all really solid options, and I genuinely do think that most people would be really happy with the way they sound. But now let's talk about build quality, comfort, and their interfaces. And just to get it out of the way, here's how much I weighed each of these and how much clamping force I measured. I will say don't anchor too much on the specific measurements from clamping force because those results are very much specific to Clampy, and I think he's kind of a 101, but they do allow you to get a good understanding of how they are relative to each other. The other note I have is I share this just for like general context because honestly, I've been using the AirPod Max as my daily driver for the last few years, and that has one of the highest clamping forces and weight, and I find them to be very comfortable. So in general, comfort is very much a subjective thing. But if headphone comfort is something that you struggle with, then you should probably check out the aptly named QuietComfort Ultra because they are my clear comfort champions. And I think it's because of the combination of their good padding, low weight, variable ANC, and their low clamping force that all kind of work together to make it just really nice to wear for longer periods of time. Also, if you happen to be a member of the Glasses Club, which yes, I am a member, then I find that the way the clamping is and the padding doesn't really cause a hot spot behind my ear. So I really appreciate that. From a build quality perspective, I think they're overall fine. The yokes are actually real metal, and on the Gen 2, they are now shiny. So if that floats your boat, there you go. I'm kind of indifferent, but I think it looks fine. I will say that they don't feel super premium, but I think that's more of a function of it's just hard to make something that's so light feel like a really valuable object. And then in terms of the interface, they did keep the touch strip for sound adjustment or volume adjustment and the button for play pause and controlling your music. Overall, I don't love it, but it's definitely serviceable. But if you want your headphone to feel super premium and are almost kind of close to a work of art, then I think the brand that clearly does it the best here is Bowers & Wilkins. The Px8 and the Px8 S2 both feel so premium. They're made with real leather on the headband and on the ear cup, and the rest of it is metal. The hinges all feel really solid. It's just a really nice headphone to hold and wear. I will say in the past, they have had some quality issues with the leather separating on the headband, but that is now thankfully behind them. The S2 and the S3 also are quite a bit slimmer than their older models, which definitely make them feel a bit more compact and modern. The Px7 does trade the leather for textile, and then you have fake leather ear cups instead of that real leather, but it still does feel like a really polished product. In terms of the interface, I prefer the placement of the buttons on the newer generation models, where it's now just a lot harder to accidentally press a button when you're like taking them on or off because now they're not on the perimeter. But in general, I think the interface is overall fine. It's nothing really special. I will say the buttons do have a decent click to them, so you are paying a lot of money here, but at least it does feel like a high quality product. I'm a bit torn on this next one, but I think the runner-up in terms of build quality is the AirPod Max. They do weigh a lot more than the others, but that all-metal construction really does make them feel like a premium and high-quality product. They also have these really nice large ear cups, and the padding has this really malleable textile that doesn't trap in as much heat, and it's really malleable for us glasses wearers, where I found after about a week or so, I don't get a hot spot, and in general, I think it's just really comfortable. So love to see that. And then from an interface perspective, this is just my #1 favorite interface on any ANC headphone out there. They have the digital crown that makes it super simple to adjust the volume. They have the dedicated ANC button on the top. It's really simple and it just saves you from faffing about trying to find the right button. I don't know, it just works really well for me and I really enjoy it. They do have one flaw that I find really frustrating though, and to show it, you gotta look at my original AirPods. So I bought these back in 2021 and you can see I've taken care of them. However, if you look more closely, you can see that the elastic in the headband is just totally blown out and doesn't have any more life in it. And this is really frustrating for a really expensive product. And you can see in my brand new one, the elastic's fine, but there's really no way to fix this. So if I go to Apple, they're gonna try to sell me a new pair. They won't fix this or repair it, which is frustrating. If I go on eBay, I can actually buy a new hoop and really easily install it myself. So props to Apple for building it that way, but I can't buy the hoop from you, so what the heck? The only option that I ultimately settled on that I thought was reasonable is spending $10 on Amazon and I get this little silicone thing that like slots over the top. It does solve the problem basically perfectly, but it's really frustrating for such a premium product. Another headphone that has a really nice solid all metal construction is the Focal Bathys. They definitely do feel good in your hand, but honestly, I think they're just a bit too big and too bulky for me to want to wear them around that much. And the other gripe that I have, and it might be a little petty, but the buttons are just kind of small and feel kind of chintzy to me, and I would just expect more from a product that costs so much. The Sennheiser HDB 630, or Sennheiser, however you pronounce it, are a bit of a mixed bag for me. From a comfort perspective, I really like them and they fit my head really well, but from a build quality side of things, I'm pretty disappointed. The yokes are plastic, the hinge is plastic, and there's a bit of play in there, and in general, they just don't feel like a super premium product, especially considering their price tag. And then the interface is another sticking point for me. It's got this touch panel, which I find to be quite finicky, and then there's not a dedicated button to toggle the ANC. So they're a fine headphone, but I just wish they hadn't cheaped out on the build quality. On the other end of the price spectrum is the Nothing Headphone 1, and personally, I do think they look a little bit goofy, and the light color version definitely emphasizes this more than the dark ones, but in general, I have to say, I actually think I like them. I think they've got a really nice build quality that's metal and plastic and it just feels solid in your hand. The hinge also gives you a good seal for ANC while also being quite comfortable. I do find the ear cups are maybe a little bit shallow, so if you've got a bit of a Dumbo problem, maybe give them a miss, but overall, I think they are a pretty nicely built headphone. And then on the interface side of things, I do like it. They've got the roller for the volume control and the paddle for changing music. The only thing that's a bit problematic is with my longer hair. Sometimes it gets a bit fiddly to get the roller working, but it's really not a big issue. So in general, I think this is actually a pretty compelling package, especially for the price. You just gotta be a fan of their looks. And now let's talk about the XM5 and XM6, and there's quite a bit to cover here, so I'm just gonna dive in and get the bad stuff out of the way. And the main thing that I noticed when I opened the box is that they felt pretty plasticky and kind of in a disappointing way. And I totally understand that there's a tension between weight and using more premium materials, but I do wish they kind of had followed Bose's path, where they included just a little bit of metal to make them kind of feel like they're worth the more premium price tag, because out of the box, they almost just feel like a toy, but what can I say? They are really nice headphones. I just wish they felt more premium. And then the other thing that, of course, we got to talk about are the hinges and the durability drama. So first, the hinges on the XM5, they made it so that they can't fold up, and on the XM6, they can fold. The main way that this manifests to people is in the size of the case. So you can see this is the XM5 case, and this is the XM6, and the XM5 case is, of course, a little bit bigger because they don't fold up. So if that matters to you, there you go. But the real drama on the XM5 is that there's quite a few people talking about the swivel on the headphones breaking. So I haven't experienced this myself, but I've seen enough to make me want to mention it. So I'll just say, if you're going to get them, either be prepared to baby them or maybe snag like a protection plan and get a deal on them. And by the way, if you're trying to get a deal, remember you can sign up for deal alerts via dip in the link below. Sorry about that plug, but I had to. But with all that negative stuff out of the way, now let's talk about the more positive things, and overall, I still like them. I personally find them both to be pretty comfortable, and some people do complain about the thickness of the XM6 ear cushion, especially on the front. I didn't really have a problem with this, but I did go ahead and try out a product called Wicked Cushions for the XM6, and I did find it made a little bit more plush on the cushioning, so if that's of interest, check them out. And the other thing that I actually surprisingly was impressed by is the interface. And it is a touch interface, and I'm usually not a touch interface kind of guy. I like tactile buttons, but of all the touch things I've ever used on headphones, I will say that Sony did a really good job here. They're definitely intuitive. It's a simple forward and backward for song control and then up and down for volume. And I didn't get any false triggers. And they also resisted the urge to try to like do too much with that touchpad, where they gave it instead a dedicated button for ANC and for power. And then on the XM6, what I appreciated is they made the power button a different shape than the ANC button, which made it easier to use and just more intuitive to find that button. Now let's talk about the Beats Studio Pro, and I'll have to say, when I entered this review, I had a pretty negative impression on Beats, and after testing them for a bit, I'll say, I think they're fine. They're definitely not my favorite, but they're not as bad as I thought they were going to be. And on the quality front, they're really plasticky, but that's kind of expected and on brand for Beats. The button interface is pretty clunky, but you know, they do have physical buttons, so I'll give it a pass. They definitely are sturdy and collapse into a pretty impressively small package. The worst thing though, for me, is the comfort. So I found the ear cups to be quite small, and that combined with the higher clamping force just meant I didn't really enjoy wearing them. And then the other issue that might be kind of unique to me is inevitably, but every single time I try to take them off, my hair would get caught in between the cup and the band, and it ended up being quite painful. So if you're one of like the 2 women who watch my channel, or maybe you're one of my long-haired brethren, you should save yourself some pain and skip these. But if you do want that classic Beats aesthetic, I'll say these are probably some of the better Beats that they've ever made. Now to round things out, we have the Sonos Ace and the Dyson OnTrac, and on the comfort side of things, I'm actually pretty impressed with both. The Dyson is definitely a lot heavier, but it does have a pretty supportive headband, so I found it to be quite comfortable. I just wouldn't want to go for a jog in it. And the Sonos Ace is a lot more conventional, but I definitely found it quite comfortable as well. And the build quality, I think, is actually pretty impressive on both. The Dyson more so because it has this very kind of nice all-metal construction, but with that is this very kind of loud design that I'm not the biggest fan of, but you know, I'm not gonna be wearing it, so you do you. The Ace does look a little bit like a kind of less premium AirPod Max. It still feels pretty nice, but it is certainly more plasticky. And then in terms of their interfaces, the Dyson has a joystick for volume and song control. It does work, but it is a little fiddly. And then the main thing that I just can't stand is how you toggle the ANC modes, because there is no physical button, and instead you have to tap on the side of the headphone, which 1 is quite loud, and then 2, it didn't always register. So sorry, but that's a fail for me. This Ace interface, I did overall like. It's got this kind of interesting content key, or it's a slider button that they call it, and you slide it up and down for volume, and you tap it for music controls. Ultimately, it did work, and it's kind of similar to the Apple philosophy. I think I prefer Apple's implementation, but overall, it's not bad. And now to close this out, let's quickly cover their battery life and connectivity, and then we'll get into any notable quirks and features. So first, here's how they all stack up from a battery life perspective. Honestly, this isn't that important to me because they can all easily get through multiple days of heavy use. And at that point, I just really don't need something that can go like 2 weeks without being charged. But who knows, that's just me. Maybe it's more important for you. And then second, here's an overview of all their connectivity. And again, on the USB-C wired audio connection front, I don't particularly find it to be very useful, but maybe you guys do, so here you go. And then another feature that I suspect a lot of people probably won't end up using, but I'll talk about quickly, is cinema mode or spatial audio mode, or whatever the marketing department has dreamt up calling it. And it's just a way of simulating a wider and more expansive soundstage. Honestly, I just always find it to be quite gimmicky, and I always end up turning it off, but maybe you value it. If you do, why, but anyway, there you go. That's what these all have. But two features that I do find really important are auto pause. So when I take the headphones off, they should automatically stop playing, and then transparency mode. And for auto pause, there's actually two here that don't have it, which kind of shocks me given these are all very premium headphones. And those two are the Beats Studio Pro and the Focal Bathys. I personally find this unforgivable, but maybe you're okay with it. Transparency mode's an interesting one because honestly, originally I thought I was never going to use this feature because what sort of human talks to another human with massive headphones on their ears? But I have to eat my humble pie and admit that after using this for a while, I find myself really enjoying it because like if the doorbell rings or if I need to have a quick conversation in the office, I can just tap a button, do what I need to do, and then go right back into my workflow. So it's actually now really important for me. And when I evaluate it, I think about two main things. So one is obviously the sound quality. Does it sound like I'm talking to someone through a PA system, or is it more natural? And then two, which I think is often overlooked, is how easy is it to trigger? Because if you have little tiny buttons next to other little tiny buttons that are all the same shape and size, it's just really hard to quickly trigger it. And at that point, you may as well just take off your headphones. So under that lens, I have to say the winner to me is still, yes, the AirPod Max. It is still the best from a sound perspective. Others are getting closer, but I still find it to be the most natural sounding. And honestly, it just doesn't really feel like I'm wearing any headphones at all, which is impressive considering these came out, I think, in 2020. But then the other factor, which is how easy it is to trigger, the AirPod Max have one big dedicated button that's away from all the other buttons, and it's just super easy and intuitive to trigger. All the other ones, they have different approaches here, some better than others, but I don't find it to be quite as intuitive. I will say from the sound perspective, I think the ones that are getting closer to Apple are the Bose QuietComfort Ultra, the XM6, the Px7 S3, and the Px8 S2, and the Sonos Ace. So I don't know, weigh this as you will, but my preference here is still on the AirPod Max. With all those more general thoughts out of the way, now let's touch on some product-specific notes, and the first ones are on the QuietComfort Ultra. So on Gen 1, a lot of people were frustrated that you couldn't fully turn off ANC. It could be turned down, or you could have transparency, but you couldn't just disable it so it turned into a normal passive headphone. So they did add this on the Gen 2, and now you can just fully disable ANC. For me, it's not the biggest thing in the world because I would always use either ANC or transparency, but some of you seem to care about this, and they listen to your feedback. The thing that is a little bit more frustrating though, is when I walk around with these in the city, maybe a little bit more vigorously, I can hear like a slight thump. And after doing some research, it seems like other people experience this too, and that it's caused by the ANC. It's not a deal breaker for me, but it's definitely pretty frustrating, especially on a headphone this expensive. So who knows, maybe they can fix it with a firmware update in the future. Fingers crossed. But the other notes I have are when I do turn on ANC, I can hear a little bit of white noise. It's not the end of the world for me, and as soon as you turn on music, you don't notice it, but some people don't like it, so figured I'd mention it. And then the other weird thing is, for whatever reason, they made the analog port on it a 2.5 millimeter rather than a 3.5 millimeter, which is not the end of the world, but again, kind of weird. And then finally, the one thing that they did add on the Gen 2 that I really like is that when you put them on your head, they can just automatically turn on, and then when you take them off and either set them down on a desk or maybe put them in their case, they'll automatically go into standby mode, and they can last for like 6 months on that standby mode. So a really nice quality of life improvement there. My final thought on the AirPod Max has to do with the Apple ecosystem. So if you have an iPhone, iPad, or maybe a MacBook, and you want your headphones to work really seamlessly across all those devices, then unfortunately you're going to be in the position of having to pay the Apple tax. Because honestly, from my experience with all these headphones, multi-point is okay-ish sometimes. Like, it works sometimes, but it just isn't that consistent, and I haven't found a single implementation that I've been impressed by, whereas Apple's ecosystem just does work pretty well now. Originally, it was kind of buggy and didn't work that well, but over the years, they've refined it, and I have to say, the AirPod Max now does swap between all my devices really, really well. So it's a frustrating position to be in, but if you are an Apple user, the AirPod Max is by far the most elegant option. And after testing the Sonys, I think the main thing that stands out to me is one, the app is pretty clunky, but two, it's also very powerful. So if you're the sort of person that wants to make it so their EQ changes based on their physical location, maybe one for the office and one for your home, you can configure that in the app. Or maybe you have the XM6 and you want it so when you're on a call, you can double tap the ANC button and it will mute your mic. Again, you can configure that in the app. So if you're a tinkerer or a massive nerd, and no shade, me too, then definitely check out the Sonys. All right, we did it. I know that was an obscene amount of information, and hopefully you found it helpful. If you did, I'd really appreciate your support with a like, comment, or sub. Or maybe you didn't watch the whole video and you're skipping ahead to the end to get the answers, in which case, no worries, I got you. Let's do a really quick lightning round. So the best all-around headphone award goes to the Bose QuietComfort Ultra Gen 2. And I say this because these are the ones that I'd be most likely to give to someone as a gift. I think they're just really well-rounded and really good at lots of different things while also being really comfortable. But if you want the absolute best ANC, then I'd probably say go with the XM6. They are still another really good option. Now, if you're an Apple user, surprise, surprise, the AirPod Max are your best bet. And I know a lot of people are going to be hesitant to buy them because they've been around for so long, but even by today's standards, they still do really, really well. And also, it's rumored that they're not going to get updated for another few years, even now. So I wouldn't hesitate getting them. They're a really solid option. Now, if you're an audiophile user, well, the HDB 630, the Px8 S2, or the Focal Bathys are probably your best options. Of those, I would probably go for the Px8 S2 just because I think it's the most premium feeling and really excellent sounding option out there. But if you're on a budget, the Nothing Headphone 1 is another really solid option as well. Or you could use Dip, which is a service I built that allows you to sign up for deal alerts on any of these headphones, and then I'll send you an email if they ever drop in price so you can buy them when the price dips. Okay, we did it. Hopefully you find it helpful, and I will see you on the next one.